Hey everyone, welcome to Midweek at the Compass. My name is Jake, if we haven't met. I'm our online campus pastor. Great to be together with you here. Great to spend just a few moments to get to chat with one another, just find out how we're doing, and to share something that's a little bit different, maybe a little bit unique. It's something that's actually probably the biggest tool in my toolbox, throwing it back a little bit to a study we did through the book of Titus a couple of weeks ago. But before we get there, just want to let you know a couple of things about me. We're going to get the chance for have you know a little bit more of who I am today, and I want to know more about who you are. So one thing you really need to know about me is I love coffee. I get a little bit jittery because I start drinking too much of it because it's a little bit hard for me to just kind of pass on a cup of coffee, to say no to a cup of coffee, to say I don't need this second, sometimes third cup of coffee. So I'm curious, one, how many cups of coffee have you had today? Make me feel better about myself. I would love to know that I'm not alone in this, especially during COVID with kids, work, everything that's going on. Sometimes I feel like, just a little coffee pick-me-up's a good thing. And the other thing I want to know is, if you're going out for coffee, where do you go and what's your go-to drink? So I love iced coffee drinks, so just plain iced coffee to me is great. Cold brews are fantastic. I'd also say, a Starbucks iced blonde vanilla latte, it tends to hit the spot. A little sweet for some people, totally get that, but it's not like clawingly sweet. So quite frankly, I think it's a nice happy medium, gets the nice espresso shot. It's delicious. So what about you? How many cups of coffee have you had today? Can you tell I'm a little amped up, so I bet I've had more than one. But besides that, what's the go-to place and coffee drink? Quite frankly, I need to start branching out. I get into a little bit of a rut sometimes. I tend to just kind of get the same thing wherever I go. So the ideas are going to help. I'm going to go back in the chat afterwards and just kind of go through and see what's what. See what kind of ideas you guys might be tossing out for me. So looking forward to getting some really, really good ideas and maybe picking up another cup of coffee here in the really near future. It's good. Can you blame me? Anyways, let's get started a little bit here. So I want you guys to know a little bit more of who I am. And it's a little bit strange sitting here talking to you about myself. I don't know about you, but sometimes talking about myself makes me uncomfortable. I get uncomfortable when people are effusive with praise towards me or, words of affirmation, those sorts of things. They just kind of make me tense up a little bit. But the same thing happens when I talk about myself. But we're going to dive into a little bit of my personal story here today because I think it's going to have some take-home applications for all of you as well. Because it lets you know my story. So I want to talk to you about stories for just a minute. My wife is awesome. Her name is Andrea. She is better than me in pretty much every way. And when I say pretty much, I mean each and every way. Hi, Andrea. I love you. I know you're going to see this at some point. But my wife, she's a speech therapist, but she also has a side hustle where she sells books. And what I've noticed is that we have more books in our house than we know what to do with, but our 3 kids love these books. Our kids have developed a love for stories. And it's no small credit to my wife, but I think the same is true for you and me. We love being captured by stories. It might be not being able to put down a good book. It might be binge watching a Netflix show, watching all of the Marvel movies 3 separate times because why not? It's a good long arc story. But stories are more than just something to keep us entertained. Stories a lot of time have things in there that let you know what truth is, that let you know a little bit behind the scenes of what's happening in somebody's life, and it lets you know how you can care for them. And quite frankly, stories help you to be ministered to. So I want to take a few moments to share a story. Because the last time I was here hosting Midweek, I was with my friend Gerald, and we were telling this story that Jesus told about the prodigal son, and we'll rehash that maybe just a little bit here at the end. But I want to tell you, Jesus was a master storyteller. Pretty much everything he laid out in the New Testament seemed to be listed in parables or in stories. So why do we talk about stories? Why do we share stories? Because I think stories resonate more than information. Stories hit home more than facts ever would. And coming from somebody who loves spreadsheets, who who goes on Wikipedia wormholes just to kind of see what's what. I love facts, but the stories are things that I remember. So I want to take a few moments here while I'm with you to tell the story of how I went from chemistry to ministry. It's going to weave around a little bit, but it's not to talk highly of myself, but it's because I really think, again, there are going to be truths that we can pull out from this story that maybe will encourage you to do something similar. So my story doesn't start out too different from anyone else of moving from chemistry to ministry. Maybe the starting point and the end point are a little bit different, but the crux of the matter is still the same. So in college, quite frankly, I'll say I chose the school that I would go to for college because they gave me the chance to keep playing tennis. I was pretty good at tennis. It wasn't great. I was never the best player on my college team, but I could hold my own. I knew how to pick up a racket. I could keep balls in play. I hated losing, so I tended to win more than I lost. But quite frankly, college was, I can find just about any major, but I get the chance to play tennis. So I ended up going to Elmhurst College, now Elmhurst University. Go Blue Jays, come on. Yeah, nobody knows what I'm talking about with that. That's okay, I'm not offended. But I decided to go to Elmhurst College. Not really thinking much of it except tennis. Tennis is going to be fun. Lo and behold, the second day of freshman orientation rolls around, and I meet this girl. And this girl just has a beautiful smile. And I sit there and I see her and I'm like, that's interesting. Now, I'm going to have a little bit of a spoiler alert. This girl turned into my wife. Again, Andrea. She's better than me. You should meet her if you haven't. So I met Andrea on the second day of freshman orientation. And then I did something I wouldn't necessarily advise to any of you. But I went home that first weekend of college. I talked to my parents and I said, hey, I met the girl that I was going to marry. Little strong. I didn't tell Andrea that right away, probably for good reason, but you know what? It was worthwhile. So I met Andrea. I told my parents I met the girl that I was going to marry. I fell deeply in love, and as hard as I fell, she fell harder for me faster. No, I'm kidding. She definitely didn't. It took her a long time, but I finally wore her down, so that's good news, right? Bonus points. So I met my wife, we started dating in college, and I was, like I said, I was a chemistry major. I had looked into going into a pre-pharmacy route, wanted to go to pharmacy school, but that ended up not really working for me. So I got to a point in college where I decided that the closest degree I could graduate with at the time was chemistry. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with a chemistry degree, but I did know that I was burnt out of school. To the point where I had professors come up to me and say, you know what, you might want to consider taking a gap year after your junior year when you're 1 year away from graduating, because you're probably just not in the healthiest frame of mind right now. That was a little bit of a blow to the ego, but I stuck it out and decided, you know what, chemistry. But here's what I did know. I wasn't going for a doctorate. I didn't want to take the 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever years it was going to be to get that PhD in chemistry, which tends to be what a lot of chemistry majors do. And I also knew that working in a lab just wasn't going to cut it. Lab work was not something that I was designed for or suited for. So I ended up going into a chemistry seminar class that we had to take in college, and I met this person that was talking about environmental chemistry and due diligence and environmental remediation. And I said, you know what? I don't know if this is something that's really going to be a fit, but it's halfway through my senior year and I kind of need to find a job for afterwards. So I talked to this person after class, and this woman ended up extending me an offer to join the firm that she was at. And this started my life in environmental chemistry. I was an environmental engineer, a consultant. That's probably the best way that I would end up putting it. So I took this job straight out of college, moved to Lisle. My wife and I got married after she was done with grad school. And I can't reiterate this enough. My wife is smarter than me. And one of the reasons she's smarter than me, and one of the reasons I love the Compass Church, is they tied a little bit together here. But my story has to do with living out our church's 4 priorities. So for those of you that don't know, our 4 priorities are to pursue, connect, serve, and reach. Pursue Him daily through Bible study and prayer. Connect in groups, serve in teams, and to reach your neighbors. And we're going to get into how each of those played out in my life here in just a moment. So my wife and I got married, we moved to Lisle, and she looked at me and she said, you know what? We need to find a church. So we had gone to church in college. We had attended Willow Creek off and on. We would go to the church that she grew up at in the city. And we were semi-regular attenders. But we knew that that wasn't going to be good enough. And my wife really put the clamps down and said, we are going to find a church. So I said, okay. So we started looking around. Now my best friend in college, shout out Joel, nice to see you, had gone to this church called the Evangelical Free Church in Naperville, which is now the Compass Church. He had already moved back to Ohio, but he's like, you know what? This church is worthwhile checking out. So my wife and I came. It's the second church we went to in the Naperville area. And we loved it. We fell in love right away. But it was so much bigger than what we had grown up with. I grew up in a small, rural-ish town where our church was about 250 people. My wife's church was about 400 people. The Compass Church was in the 1,500 person range at that time, maybe a little bit north of that. And we were like, you know, this is just bigger than we ever thought we would come across, bigger than we thought we would land in. So what are we going to do about it? So my wife, who is smarter than me, said that we are going to do two things. We are going to join a small group, and we are going to serve. But not only we're going to serve together. So we decided that we just start the on-ramp process, and we decided, let's sign up for a small group. So we just went to a small group fair, we submitted some information, and we got contacted. It just so happens that the person we got placed into their small group for was the youth pastor here at the time. His name is Rich Sanford. And I have to say, outside of my dad, I don't think that there's a single person that I could point to who spurred me on in my faith more than Rich. And I know each of you, if you love Jesus, you have those people in your life too. This isn't about these individual people necessarily, but it's to think through who are the people that played key roles in your story. For me, Rich was one of them. So we joined Rich's small group, we loved it. And we decided that, you know what, serving together would be fun to do in student ministries. So we dove in. And it started a nearly decade-long process of my wife and I serving our high school students together. But a strange thing happened about a year in. Rich ended up becoming the campus pastor of our South Naperville campus and ended up leaving our small group and ended up leaving this student ministry role. And 1 week before he did this, I remembered as clear as day, my wife and I were sitting on the couch and had never had a conversation like this before. And I just all of a sudden blurted out, you know what, Audrey, I think at some point in time, I'm going to end up going into ministry. She just kind of looked at me and was like, okay. Again, it came out of nowhere. The conversation really went nowhere after that. We might have followed it up a little bit, but it was truly just an out of the blue, I think ministry is going to come up. A week later, Rich lets us know that he's leaving. And as he's leaving that same day, another guy that was in our small group walked up to me. And he said, Jake, I don't know if you want to hear this or not, but I think you're supposed to be the next youth pastor here. My jaw dropped. I was like, okay, this is happening a little bit quickly. I figured when I said at some point I'd end up doing full-time ministry, that would be like years, decades, several decades down the road, maybe as a last career before I went into retirement, whatever the case would be. I can't think in my head that I was thinking, you know what, a week from now after making this bold declaration sounds about right. But here we were. So my wife and I prayed about it. We went through the process. Really felt this clear calling that I was supposed to be the next youth pastor here at the Compass Church. The only problem was the person that was making the hire didn't feel the same way. And I was devastated. I could have sworn that I had heard clearly from God that I was supposed to be next in line for this. So it really led to this long-term wrestling match of, did I hear clearly or not? Was this a one-time, God, are you asking me to be faithful now? Or is this a long-term calling? But one thing that was really clear was my wife and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that we weren't supposed to be done with student ministries at that point. Enter Dan Vanderwall. So if Rich spurred me on in my love for Jesus, Dan has been and continues to be just a leadership guru in my life. I can get a hold of him, I can call him. He has spoken more leadership advice to me in a short amount of time than anybody that I think I've met in my entire life. Dan, good to see you too. So Dan and I got to work together in youth. I got to learn what it meant to be this Jonathan-type role, where maybe I felt like I was supposed to be king, but God had other plans. And I can sit here now and tell you after the fact that it's for the best. I can see that within a year, maybe 2 years, I would have burnt out in that role and would have done no good to anyone. So Dan's duration ended up coming and going. He's now a campus pastor at a great church down in the Atlanta suburbs. And another youth pastor came on board in student ministries in high school named Eric Swanson. And Eric knew that I had been wrestling with this ministry question for a while. So during this time, there had been a lot of no's from my end and a lot of no's from other churches where I had looked to going on staff to do full-time ministry. And Eric came up to me and said, you know what? I have this part-time student ministry role. I think you'd be a fit for it. So I said yes. So at this point, I'm doing environmental chemistry work. I am doing consulting work. And I'm also now sticking my toe in the water of what does ministry as a career look like. But I knew student ministry by that point was going to be short-term, so I ended up going into college ministry. And it got to the point where ministry was just weighing heavier and heavier on my heart. And I knew that it was time to either make a leap or to completely step out of it. So this ended up being at the 10-year mark of my wife and I's marriage. So we ended up deciding that we were going to leave our kids with their grandparents, not on their own. They're only 7, 5, and 3. Come on, cut me a little bit of slack. But we decided that we were going to go on a 10-year anniversary cruise together just to get away for a week. Now, one of the things that's always happened with my wife and I when we decide to get away is it always seems like there's something big for us to be praying for. It seems like there's some sort of family issue, career choice to make from her end or my end of what this is going to look like. And my wife and I went on this cruise and there was nothing. And again, I remember opening my mouth and saying something along the lines of, you know, Audrey, this is the first time we've gone on vacation in a while where there hasn't been some big life decision where we have to sift through and pray through. So we got back from this cruise. We specifically chose a cruise because my work was getting so busy that I wanted to find a place where I had to turn off the phone, where I wouldn't have cell reception, so I had an excuse to truly unplug from my other job. So we got to the dock. I turned on my phone, and there's a voicemail from a guy that you may know named Daryl Cloud. Daryl's our executive pastor here at the Compass Church. And he left a message saying, hey, Jake, I want to have a conversation about some things that might be of interest to you. Why don't you come on in, let's have a meeting, we'll talk about it. So at this point, I was still doing our college ministry. I knew that we were just wrapping up a study in Joshua. So I figured, you know what, maybe he just wants to see how college ministry is going. So I get into this meeting, and it ends up being, hey, we have this full-time guest services role at our then Hobson, now Naperville campus that we think you would be a great fit for. If you want it, it's yours. So I went from thinking I had no big life decisions happening to now being at the crux of this full decision of, am I chemistry or am I ministry? God, do I trust you in the midst of this? And God, can I hear from you in the midst of all this? So my wife ended up having a clear sense that I was supposed to make this move in 2 days. It took me over 2 months to get to the point where I got this clear sense of a yes. But getting to the yes was a complicated issue. So my wife and I were praying through it. We were talking through. I remember I had told 3 specific people about this possibility and asked them to be praying for me. And I got to this point where I was saying, God, I just want to know a clear answer. Hit me over the head with a yes or a no. If it's a no, God, I want to know that this is closing the door for full-time ministry for a while. I don't want to keep having these back and forward of will I or won't I. Let me invest in the place that I'm at. But if it's a yes, knock me out with it. Put a sign in my front yard. God, give me the Gideon experience where I'll pray one thing and you will answer that prayer with that specific thing. So my prayer was, God, I've told 3 people about this. Before X Wednesday, I want you to have one of them call me in the course of this week to let me know, one way or another, just to check in. If I hear from somebody, God, I'm going to know that it's from you and that I'm ready to move. I will be comfortable at that point giving you my yes. So days ended up passing, and day tricked on into day. And it got to Wednesday. And I remember taking my lunch break and going out to my car in the parking lot of work and praying, God, it's Wednesday. Is somebody get a hold of me? And I've never had a more clear sense of God speaking to me in real time. And he more or less knocked me out saying, not in an audible way, but Jake, you don't need to hear from somebody else right now. You need to hear from me. Whew. That hit hard. I kept waiting for somebody else to speak into my life, and God was saying, I don't want you to rely on what somebody else is saying. I want you to hear from me. So during this time, like I said, we were finishing up our study in our college group on the book of Joshua. So my personal devotional time, I decided that it'd be good to just pick up from there, and I started reading through the book of Judges. So this Wednesday came and went, and Thursday morning, I pick up my Bible, and I open it, and I am in Judges chapter 6. And I read the heading of it, and the heading of it is Gideon. And I look at it, and I'm like, you have got to be joking me. I spent all this time, God, praying for a Gideon moment. Confirm for me in just some magnificent way that this is from you. And now I have to read a story about Gideon and try and find out something from his life. So I took a deep breath. I'm sure that I sighed and I said, okay, whatever, let's just start reading. I'm just going to keep going. So I started reading this story of Gideon, fully expecting to get to the story of asking for dew on the sheepskin and not on the ground and vice versa. But something interesting happened to me, and I picked something up ahead of time in chapter 6, and I'm going to read it for you right now. The story of Gideon is the angel of the Lord comes to him, and Gideon starts complaining. It's like, God, if you're for me, then why are all these bad things happening? God, if I have all these ideas, if all these things are supposed to be moving forward, why does it not seem to be working out in the way that I think it should? And the angel of the Lord replies to Gideon, and he says this in verse, in verse 13. 13 is where Gideon starts complaining. But if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. And the Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? I don't like reading myself into scripture. I don't think that's personally very healthy very frequently. You know, I was not written about in the story of Gideon. But when the angel of the Lord said, go in the strength that you had, I am sending you. I got the clear answer of God, I have now heard from you that this is my yes, that this is time to go. And I haven't looked back since. So I ended up joining our Hobson campus. I got to work in guest services. COVID hit, and I decided that it might be best to go where our guests are. And our guests were online. And that started this beautiful transition into moving from guest services into our online ministry and where we sit here today. You know, I know my transition isn't going to be a story that necessarily speaks to everyone. But guess what? It's going to speak to somebody. Somebody's going to need to hear at some point in time a story of, how did you hear from God? How did you end up having the faith to trust him for moving from point A to point B? You know, I'm so grateful for the Powells last week sharing this story of infertility and adoption. Their story resonates with people because it's real life example of pain, of heartbreak, but of trusting that God is going to work in the midst of it and that he's still good. You know, the best news of all is if we are followers of Jesus, we have the greatest story in the world. We talked last time that I was here, a handful of weeks back, about the prodigal son. The prodigal son ends with this phrase of not just that the son that had taken the father's inheritance left was lost but found, but that he was dead and is now alive. You know, some people think their story, their Christian faith, their journey isn't exciting. That I grew up in a Christian house, I've known Jesus from an early age. Praise God for that. But quite frankly, your story is always more exciting than just that. Your story is one for you were dead. There was nothing on your own that you could do. You couldn't be shaken awake. There was no alarm clock that was going to ring and wake you up. Dead was dead. But because of Jesus and who he is and what he has done for you, you are now alive. And mixed in with that, you are going to have these small, beautiful pockets of stories that are going to minister and speak to people. Some of them might be fun stories. It might be a story about something that I've dealt with of choose your friends wisely. In high school, I could tell you a story of I maybe didn't do that so well, and because of it, I'm banned for life from a Pizza Hut from my hometown. I'm not going to talk about that one now, but ask me about it at some point in time. It's kind of a fun story. But there's truths to be pulled out of that. God wants us to have great friends. He wants us to be able to pray for our friends, to eat with them, to ask them questions, to reveal our story, and to love them tangibly. If that sounds familiar, that's this evangelistic pearl method that Pastor Jeff has talked about before. Ways that we can come alongside people and share the good news of Jesus. And the crux of all of it is hearing them out, asking questions, but ultimately getting to a point where you are revealing your story. So I'm going to ask you this now. What's your story? What story do you have where you've seen God's faithfulness play out? What story do you have that you can look back days, weeks, months, years, decades later and pinpoint God's faithfulness? Because quite frankly, if you would have told me 12 years ago when I'm graduating college that I would have gone from chemistry to doing ministry on the internet, I would have said, you're nuts. But seeing the tapestry unfold and be laid out in this beautiful display is something I could have never drawn up in my wildest dreams. And you've got the same thing. You have a story that you can reveal that is powerful. So over the course of this week, I want to encourage you to reach your neighbors. My story plays out because I decided to join a group and serve on a team. I got confirmation that it was time to move into a new role for work because I was dedicated pursuing Jesus. And I get the chance to talk to you right now, to share my story, to reach my neighbors because of the good news of who he is and what he's done. So over the course of this week and next, find a way to share your story. Find a way to reach your neighbors. It might be a small picture of your story. It might be your full salvation moment. It might be how God provided food. Maybe you were like the Pauls and struggled with infertility. It could be joblessness. It could be stress and anxiety. Those are at high levels right now. It could be how you're parenting your kids to know and love Jesus. You know, our parents have a really hard thing they're going through right now of having to spend day in, day out, week after week, month after month through this COVID season, being parent and teacher and shepherd and pastor and provider and all of these things. Stress is high. It could be, you know what, here's a way that I've parented my kids during this time, and it's worked for us. Maybe there's a bit of it in there that's going to work for you. The more you are faithful to reveal your story, the more God is going to be faithful to see the good news of Jesus displayed through that. And people are going to pick up on it. So that's my story. I want to hear yours. Send me a video. Shoot me an email. Give me a phone call. Let us set up a Microsoft Teams or a Zoom call. Let's chat. I want to hear your stories. I want to be comforted by the fact that God is still with us. I want to know how God has been at work in your life. And quite frankly, I'm happy to be the practice round of it. Maybe it's not fully developed yet, and you're like, you know what? I'm working on the story of what God's done. But before I share it with a friend or family, I need to share it with somebody that's a safe space. I would love to do that. The pastor at your campus would love to do that. I guarantee it. But share your story. Reach your neighbors. Let's continue to day in and day out live these 4 priorities of the Compass Church. Let's pursue. Let's connect. Let's serve. And let's reach. We love you. We're looking forward to having another great one of these conversations next week. We'll see you real soon.